Chapter 98 of the Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Caroline Hemmerly Kunkel, Columbus, Ohio. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 98. The Bell and Bottle Tavern. And now let us leave Mademoiselle Danglars and her friend pursuing their way to Brussels, and return to poor Andrea Cavalcanti, so inopportunely interrupted in his rise to fortune. Notwithstanding his youth, Master Andrea was a very skilful and intelligent boy. We have seen that on the first rumor which reached the salon, he had gradually approached the door, and crossing 2 or 3 rooms at last disappeared. But we have forgotten to mention one circumstance, which nevertheless ought not to be omitted. In one of the rooms he crossed, the trousseau of the bride-elect was on exhibition. There were caskets of diamonds, cashmere shawls, Valenciennes lace, English veilings, and in fact, all the tempting things the bare mention of which makes the hearts of young girls bound with joy, and which is called the corbeille. Now in passing through this room, Andrea proved himself not only to be clever and intelligent, but also provident, for he helped himself to the most valuable of the ornaments before him. Furnished with this plunder, Andrea leaped with a lighter heart from the window, intending to slip through the hands of the gendarmes. Tall and well proportioned as an ancient gladiator, and muscular as a Spartan, he walked for a quarter of an hour without knowing where to direct his steps, actuated by the sole idea of getting away from the spot where if he lingered he knew that he would be surely taken. Having passed through the Rue Mont Blanc, guided by the instinct which leads thieves always to take the safest path, he found himself at the end of the Rue Lafayette. There he stopped, breathless and panting. He was quite alone. On one side was the vast wilderness of the Saint-Lazare, on the other Paris enshrouded in darkness. "Am I to be captured?" he cried. "No, not if I can use more activity than my enemies. My safety is now a mere question of speed." At this moment he saw a cab at the top of the Faubourg Poissonnière. The dull driver, smoking his pipe, was plodding along toward the limits of the Faubourg Saint-Denis, where no doubt he ordinarily had his station. "Ho, friend!" said Benedetto. "What do you want, sir?" asked the driver. "Is your horse tired?" "Tired? Oh, yes, tired enough. He has done nothing the whole of this blessed day. 4 wretched fares, and 20 sous over, making in all 7 francs, are all that I have earned, and I ought to take 10 to the owner." "Will you add these 20 francs to the 7 you have?" "With pleasure, sir. 20 francs are not to be despised. Tell me what I am to do for this." "A very easy thing, if your horse isn't tired." "I tell you, he'll go like the wind. Only tell me which way to drive." "Toward the Louvre." "Ah, I know the way. You get good sweetened rum over there." "Exactly so. I merely wish to overtake one of my friends, with whom I am going to hunt tomorrow at Château-en-Serval. He should have waited for me here with a cabriolet till 11:30. It is 12, and, tired of waiting, he must have gone on." "It is likely." "Well, will you try and overtake him?" "Nothing I should like better." "If you do not overtake him before we reach Bourget, you shall have 20 francs; if not before the Louvre, 30. "And if we do overtake him?" 40, said Andrea, after a moment's hesitation, at the end of which he remembered that he might safely promise. "That's all right," said the man. "Hop in, and we're off." Whoop la! Andrea got into the cab, which passed rapidly through the Faubourg Saint-Denis, along the Faubourg Saint-Martin, crossed the barrier, and threaded its way through the interminable Vallée. They never overtook the chimerical friend, yet Andrea frequently inquired of people on foot whom he passed, and at the inns which were not yet closed, for a green cabriolet and bay horse. And as there are a great many cabriolets to be seen on the road to the Low Countries, and as 9/10 of them are green, the inquiries increased at every step. Every one had just seen it pass. It was only 500, 200, 100 steps in advance. At length they reached it, but it was not the friend. Once the cab was also passed by a caleche rapidly whirled along by 2 post-horses. "Ah," said Cavalcanti to himself, "if I only had that britzka, those 2 good post-horses, and above all the passport that carries them on," and he sighed deeply. The calash contained Mademoiselle Danglars and Mademoiselle d'Armilly. "Hurry, hurry," said Andrea, "we must overtake him soon." And the poor horse resumed the desperate gallop it had kept up since leaving the barrier, and arrived steaming at Louvre. Certainly, said Andrea. I shall not overtake my friend, but I shall kill your horse. Therefore I had better stop. Here are 30 francs. I will sleep at the Red Horse, and will secure a place in the first coach. Good night, friend. And Andrea, after placing 6 pieces of 5 francs each in the man's hand, leaped lightly onto the pathway. The cabman joyfully pocketed the sum, and turned back on his road to Paris. Andrea pretended to go towards the Red Horse Inn, but after leaning an instant against the door and hearing the last sound of the cab, which was disappearing from view, he went on his road, and with a lusty stride soon traversed the space of 2 leagues. Then he rested. He must be near Château-en-Serval, where he pretended to be going. It was not fatigue that stayed Andrea here, it was that he might form some resolution, adopt some plan. It would be impossible to make use of a diligence, equally so to engage post-horses. To travel either way a passport was necessary. It was still more impossible to remain in the department of the Oise, one of the most open and strictly guarded in France. This was quite out of the question, especially to a man like Andrea, perfectly conversant with criminal matters. He sat down by the side of the moat, buried his face in his hands, and reflected. 10 minutes after he raised his head, his resolution was made. He threw some dust over the topcoat, which he had found time to unhook from the antechamber and button over his ball costume, and going to Château-en-Serval, he knocked loudly at the door of the only inn in the place. The host opened. "My friend," said Andrea, "I was coming from Montfontaine to Senlis, when my horse, which is a troublesome creature, stumbled and threw me. I must reach Compiègne tonight, or I shall cause deep anxiety to my family. Could you let me hire a horse of you?" An innkeeper has always a horse to let, whether it be good or bad. The host called the stable boy and ordered him to saddle Whitey. Then he awoke his son, a child of 7 years, whom he ordered to ride before the gentleman and bring back the horse. Andrea gave the innkeeper 20 francs, and in taking them from his pocket dropped a visiting card. This belonged to one of his friends at the Café de Paris, so that the innkeeper, picking it up after Andrea had left, was convinced that he had let his horse to the Count of Monte 25 Rue Saint-Dominique, that being the name and address on the card. Whitey was not a fast animal, but he kept up an easy, steady pace. In 3 hours and a half, Andrea had traversed the 9 leagues which separated him from Compiègne, and 4 o'clock struck as he reached the place where the coaches stop. There is an excellent tavern at Compiègne, well remembered by those who have ever been there. Andrea, who had often stayed there in his rides about Paris, recollected the Bell and Bottle Inn. He turned around, saw the sign by the light of a reflected lamp, and having dismissed the child, giving him all the small coin he had about him, he began knocking at the door, very reasonably concluding that having now 3 or 4 hours before him, he had best fortify himself against the fatigues of the morrow by a sound sleep and a good supper. A waiter opened the door. "My friend," said Andrea, "I have been dining at Saint-Jean-au-Bois, and expected to catch the coach which passes by at midnight, but like a fool I have lost my way, and have been walking for the last 4 hours in the forest. Show me into one of those pretty little rooms which overlook the court, and bring me a cold fowl and a bottle of Bordeaux." The waiter had no suspicions. Andrea spoke with perfect composure. He had a cigar in his mouth, and his hands in the pocket of his topcoat. His clothes were fashionably made, his chin smooth, his boots irreproachable. He looked merely as if he had stayed out very late, that was all. While the waiter was preparing his room, the hostess arose. Andrea assumed his most charming smile, and asked if he could have number 3, which he had occupied on his last stay at Compiègne. Unfortunately, number 3 was engaged by a young man who was traveling with his sister. Andrea appeared in despair, but consoled himself when the hostess assured him that number 7, prepared for him, was situated precisely the same as number 3, and while warming his feet and chatting about the last races at Chantilly, he waited until they announced his room to be ready. Andrea had not spoken without cause of the pretty rooms looking out upon the court of the Bell Tavern, which, with its triple galleries like those of a theatre, with the jessamine and clematis twining round the light columns, forms one of the prettiest entrances to an inn that you can imagine. The fowl was tender, the wine old, the fire clear and sparkling, and Andrea was surprised to find himself eating with as good an appetite as though nothing had happened. Then he went to bed, and almost immediately fell into that deep sleep which is sure to visit men of 20 years of age, even when they are torn with remorse. Now, here we are obliged to own that Andrea ought to have felt remorse, but that he did not. This was the plan which had appealed to him to afford the best chance of his security. Before daybreak, He would awake, leave the inn after rigorously paying his bill, and reaching the forest, he would, under pretense of making studies in painting, test the hospitality of some peasants, procure himself the dress of a woodcutter and a hatchet, casting off the lion's skin to assume that of the woodman, then with his hands covered with dirt, his hair darkened by means of a leaden comb, his complexion embrowned with the preparation for which one of his old comrades had given him the recipe, he intended, by following the wooded districts, to reach the nearest frontier, walking by night and sleeping in the day in the forests and quarries, and only entering inhabited regions to buy a loaf from time to time. Once past the frontier, Andrea proposed making money of his diamonds, and by uniting the proceeds to 10 banknotes he always carried about with him in case of accident, he would then find himself possessor of about 50,000 livres, which he philosophically considered as no very deplorable condition after all. Moreover, he reckoned much on the interest of the Danglars to hush up the rumor of their own misadventures. These were the reasons which, added to the fatigue, caused Andrea to sleep so soundly. In order that he might awaken early, he did not close the shutters, but contented himself with bolting the door and placing on the table an unclasped and long-pointed knife, whose temper he well knew, and which was never absent from him. About 7 in the morning, Andrea was awakened by a ray of sunlight, which played warm and brilliant upon his face. In all well-organized brains, the predominating idea, and there always is one, is sure to be the last thought before sleeping, and the first upon waking in the morning. Andrea had scarcely opened his eyes when his predominating idea presented itself, and whispered in his ear that he had slept too long. He jumped out of bed and ran to the window. A gendarme was crossing the court. A gendarme is one of the most striking objects in the world, even to a man void of uneasiness, but for one who has a timid conscience, and with good cause too, the yellow, blue, and white uniform is really very alarming. "Why is that gendarme there?" asked Andrea of himself. Then all at once he replied, with that logic which the reader has, doubtless, remarked in him, "There is nothing astonishing in seeing a gendarme at an inn. Instead of being astonished, let me dress myself." And the youth dressed himself with a facility his valet de chambre had failed to rob him of during the 2 months of fashionable life he had led in Paris. "Now then," said Andrea, while dressing himself, "I'll wait till he leaves, and then I'll slip away." And saying this, Andrea, who had now put on his boots and cravat, stole gently to the window, and a second time lifted up the muslin curtain. Not only was the first gendarme still there, but the young man now perceived a second yellow, blue, and white uniform at the foot of the staircase, the only one by which he could descend, while a third, on horseback, holding a musket in his fist, was posted as a sentinel at the great street door which alone afforded the means of egress. The appearance of the third gendarme settled the matter, for a crowd of curious loungers was extended before him, effectually blocking the entrance to the hotel. "They're after me," was Andrea's first thought. "The devil!" A pallor overspread the young man's forehead, and he looked around him with anxiety. His room, like all those on the same floor, had but one outlet to the gallery in the sight of everybody. "I am lost," was his second thought, and indeed, for a man in Andrea's situation, an arrest meant the assizes, trial, and death without mercy or delay. For a moment he convulsively pressed his head within his hands, and during that brief period he became nearly mad with terror. But soon a ray of hope glimmered in the multitude of thoughts which bewildered his mind, and a faint smile played upon his white lips and pallid cheeks. He looked around and saw the objects of his search upon the chimney-piece. There were a pen, ink, and paper. With forced composure he dipped the pen in the ink, and wrote the following lines upon a sheet of paper. "I have no money to pay my bill, but I am not a dishonest man. I leave behind me as a pledge this pen, worth 10 times the amount. I shall be excused for leaving at daybreak, for I was ashamed." He then drew the pen from his cravat and placed it on the paper. This done, instead of leaving the door fastened, he drew back the bolts and even placed the door ajar, as though he had left the room, forgetting to close it, and slipping into the chimney, like a man accustomed to that kind of gymnastic exercise, having effaced the marks of his feet upon the floor, he commenced climbing the only opening which afforded him the means of escape. At this precise time, the first gendarme Andrea had noticed walked upstairs, preceded by the commissary of police, and supported by the second gendarme who guarded the staircase, and was himself reinforced by the one stationed at the door. Andrea was indebted for this visit to the following circumstances. At daybreak the telegraphs were set at work in all directions, and almost immediately the authorities in every district had exerted their utmost endeavors to arrest the murderer of Caderousse. Compiègne, that royal residence and fortified town, is well furnished with authorities, gendarmes, and commissaries of police. They therefore began operations as soon as the telegraphic dispatch arrived, and the Bell and Bottle being the best known hotel in the town, they had naturally directed their first inquiries there. Now, besides the reports of the sentinels guarding the Hôtel de Ville, which is next door to the Bell and Bottle, it had been stated by others that a number of travelers had arrived during the night. The sentinel who was relieved at 6 o'clock in the morning remembered perfectly that just as he was taking his post a few minutes past 4, a young man arrived on horseback with a little boy before him. The young man, having dismissed the boy and horse, knocked at the door of the hotel, which was opened and again closed after his entrance. This late arrival had attracted much suspicion, and the young man being no other than Andrea, the commissary and gendarme, who was a brigadier, directed their steps toward his room. They found the door ajar. "Oh-ho!" said the brigadier, who thoroughly understood the trick. "A bad sign to find the door open. I would rather find it triply bolted." And, indeed, the little note and pin under the table confirmed, or rather corroborated, the sad truth. Andrea had fled. We say corroborated because the brigadier was too experienced to be convinced by a single proof. He glanced around, looked in the bed, shook the curtains and opened the closets, and finally stopped at the chimney. Andrea had taken the precaution to leave no traces of his feet in the ashes. But still it was an outlet, and in this light was not to be passed over without serious investigation. The brigadier sent for some sticks and straw, and having filled the chimney with them, set a light to it. The fire crackled, and the smoke ascended like the dull vapor from a volcano, but still no prisoner fell down, as they expected. The fact was that Andrea, at war with society ever since his youth, was quite as deep as a gendarme, even though he were advanced to the rank of brigadier, and quite prepared for the fire. He had climbed out on the roof and was crouching down against the chimney pots. At one time he thought he was saved, for he heard the brigadier exclaim in a loud voice to the two gendarmes, "He is not here!" But venturing to peep, he perceived that the latter, instead of retiring, as might have been reasonably expected upon this announcement, were watching with increased attention. It was now his turn to look about him. The Hôtel de Ville, a massive 16th-century building, was on his right. Anyone could descend from the openings in the tower and examine every corner of the roof below, and Andrea expected momentarily to see the head of a gendarme appear at one of these openings. If once discovered, he knew he would be lost, for the roof afforded no chance of escape. He therefore resolved to descend, not through the same chimney by which he had come up, but by a similar one conducting to another room. He looked around for a chimney from which no smoke issued, and having reached it, he disappeared through the orifice without being seen by anyone. At the same minute, one of the little windows of the Hôtel de Ville was thrown open, and the head of a gendarme appeared. For an instant it remained motionless as one of the stone decorations of the buildings. Then, after a long sigh of disappointment, the head disappeared. The brigadier, calm and dignified as the law he represented, passed through the crowd without answering the 1,000 questions addressed to him, and re-entered the hotel. "Well?" asked the two gendarmes. "Well, my boys," said the brigadier, "the brigand must really have escaped early this morning, but we will send to the Villers-Cotterêts and Noyon roads, and search the forest, when we shall catch him, no doubt." The honorable functionary had scarcely expressed himself thus, in that intonation which is peculiar to the brigadiers of the gendarmerie, when a loud scream, accompanied by the violent ringing of a bell, resounded through the court of the hotel. "Ah, what is that?" cried the brigadier. "Some traveler seems impatient," said the host. "What number was it that rang?" "Number 3. "Run, waiter." At this moment the scream and ringing were redoubled. "Ah," said the brigadier, stopping the servant, "the person who is ringing appears to want something more than a waiter. We will attend upon him with a gendarme. Who occupies number 3? "The little fellow who arrived last night in a post-chaise with his sister, and who asked for an apartment with 2 beds." The bell here rang for the 3rd time, with another shriek of anguish. "Follow me, Mr. Commissary," said the brigadier. "Tread in my steps." "Wait an instant," said the host. "Number 3 has 2 staircases, inside and outside." "Good," said the brigadier. "I will take charge of the inside one. Are the carbines loaded?" "Yes, brigadier." "Well, you must guard the exterior, and if he attempts to fly, fire upon him. He must be a great criminal, from what the telegraph says." The brigadier, followed by the commissary, disappeared by the inside staircase, accompanied by the noise which his assertions respecting Andrea had excited in the crowd. This is what happened. Andrea had very cleverly managed to descend 2/3 of the chimney, but then his foot slipped, and notwithstanding his endeavors, he came into the room with more speed and noise than he intended. It would have signified little had the room been empty, but unfortunately it was occupied. Two ladies, sleeping in one bed, were awakened by the noise, and fixing their eyes upon the spot whence the sound proceeded, they saw a man. One of these ladies, the fair one, uttered those terrible shrieks which resounded through the house, while the other, rushing to the bell rope, rang with all her strength. Andrea, as we can see, was surrounded by misfortune. "For pity's sake," he cried, pale and bewildered, without seeing whom he was addressing, "for pity's sake, do not call assistance. Save me, I will not harm you." "Andrea, the murderer!" cried one of the ladies. "Eugénie, Mademoiselle Danglars!" exclaimed Andrea, stupefied. "Help, help!" cried Mademoiselle d'Armilly, taking the bell from her companion's hand and ringing it yet more violently. "Save me, I am pursued," said Andrea, clasping his hands. "For pity, for mercy's sake, do not deliver me." "It is too late, they are coming," said Eugénie. "Well, conceal me somewhere, you can say you were needlessly alarmed, you can turn their suspicions and save my life." The two ladies, pressing closely to one another, and drawing their bedclothes tightly around them, remained silent to this supplicating voice, repugnance and fear taking possession of their minds. "Well, be it so," at length said Eugénie. "Return by the same road you came, and we will say nothing about you, unhappy wretch." "Here he is, here he is!" cried a voice from the landing. "Here he is, I see him." The brigadier had put his eye to the keyhole, and had discovered Andrea in a posture of entreaty. A violent blow from the butt end of the musket burst open the lock, two more forced out the bolts, and the broken door fell in. Andrea ran to the other door leading to the gallery, ready to rush out, but he was stopped short, and he stood with his body a little thrown back, pale and with the useless knife in his clenched hand. "Fly, then!" cried Mademoiselle d'Armilly, whose pity returned as her fears diminished. "Fly!" "Or kill yourself," said Eugénie, in a tone which a Vestal in the amphitheatre would have used when urging the victorious gladiator to finish his vanquished adversary. Andrea shuddered, and looked on the young girl with an expression which proved how little he understood such ferocious honor. "Kill myself!" he cried, throwing down his knife. "Why should I do so?" "Why, you said," answered Mademoiselle Danglars, "that you would be condemned to die like the worst criminals." "Bah!" said Cavalcanti, crossing his arms, "one has friends." The brigadier advanced to him, sword in hand. "Come, come," said Andrea, "sheathe your sword, my fine fellow; there is no occasion to make such a fuss, since I give myself up," and he held out his hands to be manacled. The girls looked with horror upon this shameful metamorphosis, the man of the world shaking off his covering and appearing as a galley slave. Andrea turned towards them, and with an impertinent smile asked, "Have you any message for your father, Mademoiselle Danglars? For in all probability I shall return to Paris." Eugénie covered her face with her hands. "Oh, ho," said Andrea, "you need not be ashamed, even though you did post after me. Was I not nearly your husband?" And with this raillery Andrea went out, leaving the two girls a prey to their own feelings of shame, and to the comments of the crowd. An hour after they stepped into their calash, both dressed in feminine attire, the gate of the hotel had been closed to screen them from sight, but they were forced, when the door was opened, to pass through a throng of curious glances and whispering voices. Eugénie closed her eyes, but though she could not see, she could hear, and the sneers of the crowd reached her in the carriage. "Oh, why is not the world a wilderness?" she exclaimed, throwing herself into the arms of Mademoiselle d'Armilly, her eyes sparkling with the same kind of rage which made Nero wish that the Roman world had but one neck, that he might sever it at a single blow. The next day they stopped at the Hôtel de Flandre at Brussels. The same evening Andrea was incarcerated in the conciergerie. End of chapter 98. Recording by Caroline Hemmerly Kunkel, Columbus, Ohio.
'99 of the Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Robert Hoffman. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 99. The Law. We have seen how quietly Mademoiselle Danglars and Mademoiselle d'Armilly accomplished their transformation and flight, the fact being that everyone was too much occupied in his or her own affairs to think of theirs. We will leave the banker contemplating the enormous magnitude of his debt before the phantom of bankruptcy, and follow the baroness, who, after being momentarily crushed under the weight of the blow which had struck her, had gone to seek her usual adviser, Lucien Debray. The baroness had looked forward to this strange marriage as a means of ridding her of a guardianship which, over a girl of Eugénie's character could not fail to be rather a troublesome undertaking, for in the tacit relations which maintain the bond of family union, the mother, to maintain her ascendency over her daughter, must never fail to be a model of wisdom and a type of perfection. Now, Madame Danglars feared Eugénie's sagacity and the influence of Mademoiselle d'Armilly. She had frequently observed the contemptuous expression with which her daughter looked upon Debray, an expression which seemed to imply that she understood all her mother's amorous and pecuniary relationships with the intimate secretary. Moreover, she saw that Eugénie detested Debray, not only because he was a source of dissension and scandal under the paternal roof, but because she had at once classed him in that catalogue of bipeds whom Plato endeavors to withdraw from the appellation of men, and whom Diogenes designated as animals upon two legs without feathers. Unfortunately, in this world of ours, each person views things through a certain medium, and so is prevented from seeing in the same light as others, and Madame Danglars, therefore, very much regretted that the marriage of Eugénie had not taken place, not only because the match was good, and likely to ensure the happiness of her child, but because it would also set her at liberty. She ran therefore to Debray, who, after having like the rest of Paris witnessed the contract scene and the scandal attending it, had retired in haste to his club, where he was chatting with some friends upon the events which served as a subject of conversation for three-fourths of that city known as the capital of the world. At the precise time when Madame Danglars, dressed in black and concealed in a long veil, was ascending the stairs leading to Debray's apartments, notwithstanding the assurances of the concierge that the young man was not at home, Debray was occupied in repelling the insinuations of a friend, who tried to persuade him that after the terrible scene which had just taken place he ought, as a friend of the family, to marry Mademoiselle Danglars and her 2 millions. Debray did not defend himself very warmly, for the idea had sometimes crossed his mind; still, when he recollected the independent, proud spirit of Eugénie, he positively rejected it as utterly impossible, though the same thought again continually recurred and found a resting place in his heart. Tea, play, and the conversation, which had become interesting during the discussion of such serious affairs, lasted till 1 o'clock in the morning. Meanwhile, Madame Danglars, veiled and uneasy, awaited the return of Debray in the little green room, seated between 2 baskets of flowers, which she had that morning sent, and which, it must be confessed, Debray had himself arranged and watered with so much care that his absence was half excused in the eyes of the poor woman. At 20 minutes of 12, Madame Danglars, tired of waiting, returned home. Women of a certain grade are like prosperous grisettes in one respect, they seldom return home after 12 o'clock. The baroness returned to the hotel with as much caution as Eugénie used in leaving it. She ran lightly upstairs, and with an aching heart entered her apartment, contiguous, as we know, to that of Eugénie. She was fearful of exciting any remark, and believed firmly in her daughter's innocence and fidelity to the paternal roof. She listened at Eugénie's door, and hearing no sound tried to enter, but the bolts were in place. Madame Danglars then concluded that the young girl had been overcome with the terrible excitement of the evening, and had gone to bed and to sleep. She called the maid and questioned her. "Mademoiselle Eugénie," said the maid, "retired to her apartment with Mademoiselle d'Armilly. Then they took tea together, after which they desired me to leave, saying that they needed me no longer." Since then the maid had been below, and like everyone else she thought the young ladies were in their own room. Madame Danglars therefore went to bed without a shadow of suspicion, and began to muse over the recent events. In proportion as her memory became clearer, the occurrences of the evening were revealed in their true light. What she had taken for confusion was a tumult; what she had regarded as something distressing was in reality a disgrace. And then the baroness remembered that she had felt no pity for poor Mercédès, who had been afflicted with as severe a blow through her husband and son. "Eugénie," she said to herself, "is lost, and so are we. The affair, as it will be reported, will cover us with shame, for for in a society such as ours satire inflicts a painful and incurable wound. How fortunate that Eugénie is possessed of that strange character which has so often made me terrible!" And her glance was turned towards heaven, where a mysterious providence disposes all things, and out of a fault, nay, even a vice, sometimes produces a blessing. And then her thoughts, cleaving through space like a bird in the air, rested on Cavalcanti. This Andrea was a wretch, a robber, an assassin, and yet his manners showed the effects of a sort of education, if not a complete one. He had been presented to the world with the appearance of an immense fortune, supported by an honorable name. How could she extricate herself from this labyrinth? To whom would she apply to help her out of this painful situation? Debray, to whom she had run, with the first instinct of a woman towards the man she loves and who yet betrays her, Debray could but give her advice. She must apply to someone more powerful than he. The baroness thought of M. de Villefort. It was M. de Villefort who had remorselessly brought misfortune into her family, as though they had been strangers. But no, on reflection, the procureur was not a merciless man, and it was not the magistrate, slave to his duties, but the friend, the loyal friend, who roughly but firmly cut into the very core of the corruption. It was not the executioner, but the surgeon, who wished to withdraw the honor of Danglars from ignominious association with the disgraced young man they had presented to the world as their son-in-law. And since Villefort, the friend of Danglars, had acted in this way, no one could suppose that he had been previously acquainted with, or had lent himself to, any of Andrea's intrigues. Villefort's conduct, therefore, upon reflection, appeared to the baroness as if shaped for their mutual advantage. But the inflexibility of the procureur should stop there. She would see him the next day, and if she could not make him fail in his duties as a magistrate, she would, at least, obtain all the indulgence he could allow. She would invoke the past, recall old recollections. She would supplicate him by the remembrance of guilty yet happy days. M. de Villefort would stifle the affair. He had only to turn his eyes on one side and allow Andrea to fly, and follow up the crime under the shadow of guilt called contempt of court. And after this reasoning she slept easily. At 9 o'clock next morning she arose, and without ringing for her maid or giving the least sign of her activity, she dressed herself in the same simple style as on the previous night. Then running downstairs, she left the hotel, walked to the Rue de Provence, called a cab, and drove to M. de Villefort's house. For the last month this wretched house had presented the gloomy appearance of a lazaretto infected with the plague. Some of the apartments were closed within and without. The shutters were only opened to admit a minute's air, showing the scared face of a footman, and immediately afterwards the window would be closed, like a gravestone falling on a sepulchre, and the neighbors would say to each other in a low voice, "Will there be another funeral today at the procureur's house?" Madame Danglars involuntarily shuddered at the desolate aspect of the mansion. Descending from the cab, she approached the door with trembling knees, and rang the bell. 3 times did the bell ring with a dull, heavy sound, seeming to participate in the general sadness, before the concierge appeared and peeped through the door, which he opened just wide enough to allow his words to be heard. He saw a lady, a fashionable, elegantly dressed lady, and yet the door remained almost closed. "Do you intend opening the door?" said the baroness. "First, madame, who are you?" "Who am I? You know me well enough." "We no longer know anyone, madame." "Do you intend opening the door?" said the baroness. "First, madame, who are you?" "Who am I? You know me well enough." "We no longer know anyone, madame." "You must be mad, my friend," said the baroness. "Where do you come from?" "Oh, this is too much!" "Madame, these are my orders, excuse me. Your name?" "The Baroness Danglars. You have seen me 20 times." "Possibly, madame. And now what do you want?" "Oh, how extraordinary! I shall complain to M. de Villefort of the impertinence of his servants." "Madame, this is precaution, not impertinence. No one enters here without an order from M. de Varny, or without speaking to the procureur." "Well, I have business with the procureur." "Is it pressing business?" "You can imagine so, since I have not even brought my carriage out yet. But enough of this. Here is my card, take it to your master." "Madame will await my return?" "Yes, go." The concierge closed the door, leaving Madame Danglars in the street. She had not long to wait; directly afterwards the door was opened wide enough to admit her, and when she had passed through it was again shut. Without losing sight of her for an instant, the concierge took a whistle from his pocket as soon as they entered the court, and blew it. The valet de chambre appeared on the doorsteps. "You will excuse this poor fellow, madame," he said, as he preceded the baroness, "but his orders are precise, and M. de Villefort begged me to tell you that he could not act otherwise." In the court, showing his merchandise, was a tradesman who had been admitted with the same precautions. The baroness ascended the steps; she felt herself strongly infected with the sadness which seemed to magnify her own, and still guided by the valet de chambre, who never lost sight of her for an instant, she was introduced to the magistrate's study. Preoccupied as Madame Danglars had been with the object of her visit, the treatment she had received from these underlings appeared to her so insulting, that she began by complaining of it; but Villefort, raising his head, bowed down by grief, looked up at her with so sad a smile that her complaints died upon her lips. "Forgive my servants," he said, "for a terror I cannot blame them for; from being suspected they have become suspicious." Madame Danglars had often heard of the terror to which the magistrate alluded, but without the evidence of her own eyesight she could never have believed that the sentiment had been carried so far. "You, too, then, are unhappy?" she said. "Yes, madame," replied the magistrate. "Then you pity me?" "Sincerely, madame." "And you understand what brings me here?" "You wish to speak to me about the circumstance which has just happened?" "Yes, sir, a fearful misfortune." "You mean a mischance?" "A mischance?" repeated the baroness. "Alas, madame," said the procureur with his imperturbable calmness of manner, "I consider those alone misfortunes which are irreparable." "And do you suppose this will be forgotten?" "Everything will be forgotten, madame," said Villefort. "Your daughter will be married tomorrow, if not today; in a week, if not tomorrow, and I do not think you can regret the intended husband of your daughter." Madame Danglars gazed on Villefort, stupefied to find him so almost insultingly calm. "Am I come to a friend?" she asked in a full tone of mournful dignity. "You know that you are, madame," said Villefort, whose pale cheeks became slightly flushed as he gave her the assurance. And truly this assurance carried him back to different events from those now occupying the baroness and him. "Well, then, be more affectionate, my dear Villefort," said the baroness. "Speak to me not as a magistrate, but a friend; and when I am in bitter anguish of spirit do not tell me that I ought to be gay." Villefort bowed. "When I hear misfortunes named, madame," he said, "I have within the last few months contracted the bad habit of thinking of my own, and then I cannot help drawing up an egotistical parallel in my mind. That is the reason that by the side of my misfortunes yours appear to me mere mischances. That is why my dreadful position makes yours appear enviable. But this annoys you. Let us change the subject. You were saying, madame?" "I came to ask you, my friend," said the baroness, "what will be done with this impostor?" "Impostor?" repeated Villefort. "Certainly, madame, you appear to extenuate some cases and exaggerate others. Impostor, indeed! Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti, or rather Monsieur Benedetto, is nothing more nor less than an assassin." "Sir, I do not deny the justice of your correction, but the more severely you arm yourself against that unfortunate man, the more deeply will you strike our family. Come, forget him for a moment, and instead of pursuing him, let him go." "You are too late, madame. The orders are issued." "Well, should he be arrested? Do they think they will arrest him?" "I hope so." "If they should arrest him, I know that sometimes prisoners afford means of escape. Will you leave him in prison?" The procureur shook his head. "At least keep him there till my daughter be married?" "Impossible, madame. Justice has its formalities." "What, even for me?" said the baroness, half jesting, half in earnest. "For all, even for myself among the rest," replied Villefort. "Ah!" exclaimed the baroness, without expressing the ideas which the exclamation betrayed. Villefort looked at her with that piercing glance which reads the secrets of the heart. "Yes, I know what you mean," he said. "You refer to the terrible rumors spread abroad in the world, that the deaths which have kept me in mourning for the last 3 months, and from which Valentine has only escaped by a miracle, have not happened by natural means." "I was not thinking of that," replied Madame Danglars quickly. "Yes, you were thinking of it, and with justice; you could not help thinking of it, and saying to yourself, 'You who pursue crime so vindictively, answer now why are there unpunished crimes in your dwelling?'" The baroness became pale. "You were saying this, were you not?" "Well, I own it." "I will answer you." Villefort drew his armchair nearer to Madame Danglars; then resting both hands upon his desk, he said in a voice more hollow than usual, "There are crimes which remain unpunished because the criminals are unknown, and we might strike the innocent instead of the guilty; but when the culprits are discovered——" Villefort here extended his hand toward a large crucifix placed opposite to his desk. "When they are discovered, I swear to you, by all I hold most sacred, that whoever they may be, they shall die. Now, after the oath I have just taken, and which I will keep, madame, dare you ask for mercy for that wretch?" "But, sir, are you sure he is as guilty as they say?" "Listen, this is his description: Benedetto condemned at the age of 16 for 5 years to the galleys for forgery. He promised well, as you see, first a runaway, then an assassin." "And who is this wretch?" "Who can tell? A vagabond, a Corsican." "Has no one owned him?" "No one; his parents are unknown." "But who was the man who brought him from Lucca?" "Another rascal like himself, perhaps his accomplice." The baroness clasped her hands.
"Villefort,"
she exclaimed in her softest and most captivating manner. "For heaven's sake, madame," said Villefort, with a firmness of expression not altogether free from harshness,—"for heaven's sake, do not ask pardon of me for a guilty wretch. What am I, the law? Has the law any eyes to witness your grief? Has the law ears to be melted by your sweet voice? Has the law a memory for all those soft recollections you endeavor to recall? No, madame, the law has commanded, and when it commands it strikes. You will tell me that I am a living being, and not a code, a man, and not a volume. Look at me, madame, look around me. Have mankind treated me as a brother? Have they loved me? Have they spared me? Has anyone shown the mercy towards me that you now ask at my hands? No, madame, they struck me, always struck me. Woman, siren that you are, do you persist in fixing on me that fascinating eye which reminds me that I ought to blush? Well, be it so. Let me blush for the faults you know, and perhaps for even more than those. But having sinned myself, it may be more deeply than others, I never rest till I have torn the disguises from my fellow creatures, and found out their weaknesses. I have always found some proof of human perversity or error. Every criminal I condemn seems to me living evidence that I am not a hideous exception to the rest. Alas, 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 all the world is wicked! Let us therefore strike at wickedness." Villefort pronounced these last words with a feverish rage, which gave a ferocious eloquence to his words.
"But,"
said Madame Danglars, resolving to make a last effort,
"this young man, though a murderer, is an orphan,
abandoned by everybody." "So much the worse, or rather so much the better. It has been so ordained that he may have none to weep his fate."
"But this is trampling on the weak, sir."
"This weakness of a murderer?"
"His dishonor reflects upon us."
"Is not death in my house?"
"Oh, sir," exclaimed the baroness, "you are without pity for others. Well, then, I tell you they will have no mercy on you."
"Be it so," said Villefort, raising his arms to heaven.
"At least, delay the trial till the next assizes; we shall then have 6 months before us."
"No, madame," said Villefort, "instructions have been given. There are yet 5 days left; 5 days are more than I require. Do you not think that I also long for forgetfulness? While working night and day I sometimes lose all recollection of the past, and then I experience the same sort of happiness I can imagine the dead feel. Still, it is better than suffering."
"But, sir, he has fled; let him escape. Inaction is a pardonable offense."
"I tell you it is too late. Early this morning the telegraph was employed, and at this very minute——" "Sir," said the valet de chambre, entering the room, "a dragoon has brought this despatch from the minister of the interior." Villefort seized the letter and hastily broke the seal. Madame Danglars trembled with fear. Villefort started with joy. "Arrested!" he exclaimed. "He will be taken at Compiègne, and all is over." Madame Danglars rose from her seat, pale and cold.
"Adieu, sir," she said.
"Adieu, madame," replied the king's attorney, as in an almost joyful manner he conducted her to the door. Then turning to his desk, he said, striking the letter with the back of his right hand, "Come, I had a forgery, 3 robberies, and 2 cases of arson. I only wanted a murder, and here it is. It will be a splendid session."
Chapter 99. This recording by Robert Hoffman.
Of the Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Robert Hoffman. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 100. The Apparition. As the procureur had told Madame Danglars, Valentine was not yet recovered. Bowed down with fatigue, she was indeed confined to her bed, and it was in her own room, and from the lips of Madame de Villefort, that she heard all the strange events we have related. We mean the flight of Eugénie and the arrest of Andrea Cavalcanti, or rather Benedetto, together with the accusation of murder pronounced against him. But Valentine was so weak that this recital scarcely produced the same effect it would have done had she been in her usual state of health. Indeed, her brain was only the seat of vague ideas, and confused forms, mingled with strange fancies, alone presented themselves before her eyes. During the daytime Valentine's perceptions remained tolerably clear, owing to the constant presence of M. Noirtier, who caused himself to be carried to his granddaughter's room, and watched her with his paternal tenderness. Villefort also, on his return from the law courts, frequently passed an hour or two with his father and child. At 6 o'clock Villefort retired to his study. At 8 M. d'Avrigny himself arrived, bringing the night draught prepared for the young girl, and then M. Noirtier was carried away. A nurse of the doctor's choice succeeded them, and never left till about 10 or 11 o'clock, when Valentine was asleep. As she went downstairs she gave the keys of Valentine's room to M. de Villefort, so that no one could reach the sick room excepting through that of Madame de Villefort and little Edward. Every morning Morrel called on Noirtier to receive news of Valentine, and, extraordinary as it seemed, each day found him less uneasy. Certainly, though Valentine still labored under dreadful nervous excitement, she was better, and moreover, Monte Cristo had told him when, half distracted, he had rushed to the count's house, that if she were not dead in 2 hours she would be saved. Now 4 days had elapsed, and Valentine still lived. The nervous excitement of which we speak pursued Valentine even in her sleep, or rather in that state of somnolence which succeeded her waking hours. It was then, in the silence of night, in the dim light shed from the alabaster lamp on the chimney-piece, that she saw the shadows pass and repass which hover over the bed of sickness, and fan the fever with their trembling wings. First she fancied she saw her stepmother threatening her. Then Morrel stretched his arms toward her. Sometimes mere strangers, like the Count of Monte Cristo, came to visit her. Even the very furniture, in these moments of delirium, seemed to move, and this state lasted till about 3 o'clock in the morning, when a deep, heavy slumber overcame the young girl, from which she did not awake till daylight. On the evening of the day on which Valentine had learned of the flight of Eugénie and the arrest of Benedetto, Villefort having retired as well as Noirtier and d'Avrigny, her thoughts wandered in a confused maze, alternately reviewing her own situation and the events she had just heard. 11 o'clock had struck. The nurse, having placed the beverage prepared by the doctor within reach of the patient, and locked the door, was listening with terror to the comments of the servants in the kitchen, and storing her memory with all the horrible stories which had for some months past amused the occupants of the antechambers in the house of the king's attorney. Meanwhile, an unexpected scene was passing in the room which had been so carefully locked. 10 minutes had elapsed since the nurse had left. Valentine, who for the last hour had been suffering from the fever which returned nightly, incapable of controlling her ideas, was forced to yield to the excitement which exhausted itself in producing and reproducing a succession and recurrence of the same fancies and images. The night lamp threw out countless rays, each resolving itself into some strange form to her disordered imagination, when suddenly by its flickering light Valentine thought she saw the door of her library, which was in the recess by the chimney-piece, open slowly, though she in vain listened for the sound of the hinges on which it turned. At any other time Valentine would have seized the silken bell-pull and summoned assistance, but nothing astonished her in her present situation. Her reason told her that all the visions she beheld were but the children of her imagination, and the conviction was strengthened by the fact that in the morning no traces remained of the nocturnal phantoms, who disappeared with the coming of daylight. From behind the door a human figure appeared, but the girl was too familiar with such apparitions to be alarmed, and therefore only stared, hoping to recognize Morrel. The figure advanced toward the bed and appeared to listen with profound attention. At this moment a ray of light glanced across the face of the midnight visitor. "It is not he," she murmured, and waited, in the assurance that this was but a dream, for the man to disappear or assume some other form. Still she felt her pulse, and finding it throb violently, she remembered that the best method of dispelling such illusions was to drink, for a draught of the beverage prepared by the doctor to allay her fever seemed to cause a reaction of the brain, and for a short time she suffered less. Valentine therefore reached her hand towards the glass, but as soon as her trembling arm left the bed the apparition advanced more quickly towards her, and approached the young girl so closely that she fancied she heard his breath, and felt the pressure of his hand. This time the illusion, or rather the reality, surpassed anything Valentine had before experienced. She began to believe herself really alive and awake, and the belief that her reason was this time not deceived made her shudder. The pressure she felt was evidently intended to arrest her arm, and she slowly withdrew it. Then the figure, from whom she could not detach her eyes, and who appeared more protecting than menacing, took the glass, and walking towards the night-light held it up, as if to test its transparency. This did not seem sufficient. The man, or rather the ghost, for he trod so softly that no sound was heard, then poured out about a spoonful into the glass, and drank it. Valentine witnessed this scene with a sentiment of stupefaction. Every minute she had expected that it would vanish and give place to another vision. But the man, instead of dissolving like a shadow, again approached her, and said in an agitated voice, "Now you may drink." Valentine shuddered. It was the first time one of these visions had ever addressed her in a living voice, and she was about to utter an exclamation. The man placed his finger on her lips. "The Count of Monte Cristo," she murmured. It was easy to see that no doubt now remained in the young girl's mind as to the reality of the scene. Her eyes started with terror, her hands trembled, and she rapidly drew the bedclothes closer to her. Still, the presence of Monte Cristo at such an hour, his mysterious, fanciful, and extraordinary entrance into her room through the wall, might well seem impossibilities to her shattered reason. "Do not call on anyone, do not be alarmed," said the count. "Do not let a shade of suspicion or uneasiness remain in your breast. The man standing before you, Valentine," for this time it was no ghost, "is nothing more than the tenderest father and the most respectful friend you could dream of." Valentine could not reply. The voice which indicated the real presence of a being in the room alarmed her so much that she feared to utter a syllable. Still, the expression of her eyes seemed to inquire, "If your intentions are pure, why are you here?" The count's marvellous sagacity understood all that was passing in the young girl's mind. "Listen to me," he said, "or rather look upon me. Look at my face, paler even than usual, and my eyes, red with weariness. For 4 days I have not closed them, for I have been constantly watching you, to protect and preserve you from Maximilian." The blood mounted rapidly to the cheeks of Valentine, for the name just announced by the count dispelled all the fear with which his presence had inspired her. "Maximilian!" she exclaimed, and so sweet did the sound appear to her, that she repeated it. "Maximilian! Has he then owned all to you?" "Everything. He told me your life was his, and I have promised him that you shall live." "You have promised him that I shall live?" "Yes." "But, sir, you spoke of vigilance and protection. Are you a doctor?" "Yes, the best you could have at the present time, believe me." "But you say you have watched," said Valentine uneasily. "Where have you been? I have not seen you." The count extended his hand towards the library. "I was hidden behind that door," he said, "which leads into the next house, which I have rented." Valentine turned her eyes away, and with an indignant expression of pride and modest fear, exclaimed, "Sir, I think you have been guilty of an unparalleled intrusion, and that what you call protection is more like an insult." "Valentine," he answered, "during my long watch over you, all I have observed has been what people visited you, what nourishment was prepared, and what beverage was served. Then, when the latter appeared dangerous to me, I entered, as I have now done, and substituted, in the place of the poison, a healthful draught, which, instead of producing the death intended, caused life to circulate in your veins." "Poison? Death?" exclaimed Valentine, half believing herself under the influence of some feverish hallucination. "What are you saying, sir?" "Hush, my child," said Monte Cristo, again placing his finger upon her lips. "I did say poison and death. But drink some of this." And the count took a little bottle from his pocket, containing a red liquid, of which he poured a few drops into the glass. "Drink this, and then take nothing more tonight." Valentine stretched out her hand, but scarcely had she touched the glass when she drew back in fear. Monte Cristo took the glass, drank half its contents, and then presented it to Valentine, who smiled and swallowed the rest. "Oh, yes," she exclaimed, "I recognize the flavor of my nocturnal beverage which refreshed me so much, and seemed to ease my aching brain. Thank you, sir, thank you." "This is how you have lived during the last 4 nights, Valentine," said the count. "But oh, how I passed that time! Oh, the wretched hours I have endured, the torture to which I have submitted when I saw the deadly poison poured into your glass, and how I trembled lest you should drink it before I could find time to throw it away." "Sir," said Valentine, at the height of her terror, "you say you endured tortures when you saw the deadly poison poured into my glass, but if you saw this, you must have also seen the person who poured it." "Yes." Valentine raised herself in bed, and drew over her chest, which appeared whiter than snow, The embroidered cambric, still moist with the cold dews of delirium, to which were now added those of terror.
"You saw the person?"
repeated the young girl. "Yes," repeated the count.
"What you tell me is horrible, sir. You wish to make me believe something too dreadful. What! Attempt to murder me in my father's house, in my room, on my bed of sickness? Oh, leave me, sir. You are tempting me. You make me doubt the goodness of Providence. It is impossible. It cannot be."
"Are you the first that this hand has stricken? Have you not seen Monsieur de Saint Méran, Madame de Saint Méran, Barrois, all fall? Would not Monsieur Noirtier also have fallen a victim, had not the treatment he has been pursuing for the last 3 years neutralized the effects of the poison?"
"Oh, heaven!" said Valentine. "Is this the reason why grandpa has made me share all his beverages during the last month?"
"And have they all tasted of a slightly bitter flavor, like that of dried orange peel?"
"Oh, yes, yes."
"Then that explains all," said Monte Cristo. "Your grandfather knows, then, that a poisoner lives here; perhaps he even suspects the person. He has been fortifying you, his beloved child, against the fatal effects of the poison, which has failed because your system was already impregnated with it. But even this would have availed little against a more deadly medium of death employed 4 days ago, which is generally but too fatal."
"But who then is this assassin, this murderer?"
"Let me also ask you a question. Have you never seen anyone enter your room at night?"
"Oh, yes, I have frequently seen shadows pass close to me, approach and disappear; but I took them for visions raised by my feverish imagination, and indeed when you entered I thought I was under the influence of delirium."
"Then you do not know who it is that attempts your life?"
"No," said Valentine. "Who could desire my death?"
"You shall know it now, then," said Monte Cristo, listening.
"How do you mean?"
said Valentine, looking anxiously around. "Because you are not feverish or delirious tonight, but thoroughly awake. Midnight is striking, which is the hour murderers choose."
"Oh, heavens!"
exclaimed Valentine, wiping off the drops which ran down her forehead. Midnight struck slowly and sadly. Every hour seemed to strike with leaden weight upon the heart of the poor girl. "Valentine," said the count, "summon up all your courage. Still the beatings of your heart. Do not let a sound escape you, and feign to be asleep. Then you will see." Valentine seized the count's hand.
"I think I hear a noise," she said. "Leave me."
"Goodbye for the present," replied the count, walking upon tiptoe towards the library door, and smiling with an expression so sad and paternal that the young girl's heart was filled with gratitude. Before closing the door he turned around once more, and said, "Not a movement, not a word. Let them think you asleep, or perhaps you may be killed before I have the power of helping you." And with this fearful injunction the count disappeared through the door, which noiselessly closed after him. End of chapter 100. Recording by Robert Hoffman.
Chapter 101 of The Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mia. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 101, Locusta. Valentine was alone. 2 other clocks, slower than that of Saint-Philippe du Roule, struck the hour of midnight from different directions, and excepting the rumbling of a few carriages, all was silent. Then Valentine's attention was engrossed by the clock in her room, which marked the seconds. She began counting them, remarking that they were much slower than the beatings of her heart, and still she doubted. The inoffensive Valentine could not imagine that anyone should desire her death. Why should they? To what end? What had she done to excite the malice of an enemy? There was no fear of her falling asleep. One terrible idea pressed upon her mind, that someone existed in the world who had attempted to assassinate her, and who was about to endeavor to do so again. Supposing this person, worried at the inefficacy of the poison, should, as Monte Cristo intimated, have recourse to steel, what if the Count should have no time to run to her rescue? What if her last moments were approaching, and she should never again see Moreau? When this terrible chain of ideas presented itself, Valentine was nearly persuaded to ring the bell and call for help. But through the door she fancied she saw the luminous eye of the Count, that eye which lived in her memory, and the recollection overwhelmed her with so much shame that she asked herself whether any amount of gratitude could ever repay his adventurous and devoted friendship. 20 minutes, 20 tedious minutes passed thus, then 10 more, and at last the clock struck the half-hour. Just then the sound of fingernails slightly grating against the door of the library informed Valentine that the Count was still watching, and recommended her to do the same. At the same time, on the opposite side, that is towards Edward's room, Valentine fancied that she heard the creaking of the floor. She listened attentively, holding her breath till she was nearly suffocated. The lock turned, and the door slowly opened. Valentine had raised herself up on her elbow, and had scarcely time to throw herself down on the bed and shade her eyes with her arm. Then, trembling, agitated, and her heart beating with indescribable terror, she awaited the event. Someone approached the bed and drew back the curtains. Valentine summoned every effort, and breathed with that regular respiration which announces tranquil sleep. "Valentine," said a low voice. Still silent, Valentine had promised not to awake. Then everything was still, excepting that Valentine heard the almost noiseless sound of some liquid being poured into the glass she had just emptied. Then she ventured to open her eyelids and glance over her extended arm. She saw a woman in a white dressing gown pouring liquid from a phial into her glass. During this short time Valentine must have held her breath, or moved in some slight degree, for the woman, disturbed, stopped and leaned over the bed, in order to better to ascertain whether Valentine slept. It was Madame de Villefort. On recognizing her stepmother, Valentine could not repress a shudder, which caused a vibration in the bed. Madame de Villefort instantly stepped back close to the wall, and there, shaded by the bed curtains, she silently and attentively watched the slightest movement of Valentine. The latter recollected the terrible caution of Monte Cristo. She fancied that the hand not holding the phial clasped a long sharp knife. Then, collecting all her remaining strength, she forced herself to close her eyes. But this simple operation upon the most delicate organs of our frame, generally so easy to accomplish, became almost impossible at this moment. So much did curiosity struggle to retain the eyelid open and learn the truth. Madame de Villefort, however, reassured by the silence, which was alone disturbed by the regular breathing of Valentine, again extended her hand, and half hidden by the curtains succeeded in emptying the contents of the phial into the glass. Then she retired so gently that Valentine did not know she had left the room. She only witnessed the withdrawal of the arm, the fair round arm of a woman but 25 years old, and who yet spread death around her. It is impossible to describe the sensations experienced by Valentine during the minute and a half Madame de Villefort remained in the room. The grating against the library door aroused the young girl from the stupor in which she was plunged, and which almost amounted to insensibility. She raised her head with an effort. The noiseless door again turned on its hinges, and the Count of Monte Cristo reappeared. "Well," said he, "do you still doubt?" "Oh," murmured the young girl, "have you seen?" "Alas!" "Did you recognize?" Valentine groaned. "Oh, yes," she said, "I saw, but I cannot believe." "Would you rather die, then, and cause Maximilian's death?" "Oh," repeated the young girl, almost bewildered, "can I not leave the house? Can I not escape?" "Valentine, the hand which now threatens you will pursue you everywhere. Your servants will be seduced with gold, and death will be offered to you disguised in every shape. You will find it in the water you drink from the spring, in the fruit you pluck from the tree. But did you not say that my kind grandfather's precaution had neutralized the poison? Yes, but not against a strong dose. The poison will be changed, and the quantity increased. He took the glass and raised it to his lips. It is already done, he said. Brucine is no longer employed, but a simple narcotic. I can recognize the flavor of the alcohol in which it has been dissolved. If you had taken what Madame de Villefort had poured into your glass, Valentine, you would have been doomed. But, exclaimed the young girl, why am I thus pursued? Why are you so kind, so good, so unsuspicious of ill, that you cannot understand, Valentine? No, I have never injured her. But you are rich, Valentine. You have 200,000 livres a year, and you prevent her son from enjoying these 200,000 livres. How so? The fortune is not her gift, but is inherited from my relations. Certainly, and that is why Monsieur and Madame de Saint-Méran have died. That is why Monsieur Noirtier was sentenced the day he made you his heir. That is why you, in your turn, are to die. It is because your father will inherit your property, and your brother, his only son, succeed to his. Edward? Poor child! Are all these crimes committed on his account? Ah, then you at length understand. Heaven grant that this may not be visited upon him. Valentine, you are an angel. But why is my grandfather allowed to live? It was considered that you dead, the fortune would naturally revert to your brother, unless he were disinherited, and besides, the crime appearing useless, it would be folly to commit it. And is it possible that this frightful combination of crimes has been invented by a woman? Do you recollect, in the arbor of the Hotel des Postes, at Perugia, seeing a man, in the brown cloak, whom your stepmother was questioning upon Aqua Tofana? Well, ever since then, the infernal project has been ripening in her brain. Ah, then, indeed, sir, said the sweet girl, bathed in tears, I see that I am condemned to die. No, Valentine, for I have foreseen all their plots. No, your enemy is conquered, since we know her, and you will live, Valentine. Live to be happy yourself, and to confer happiness upon a noble heart. But to ensure this, you must rely on me. Command me, sir. What am I to do? You must blindly take what I give you. Alas, were it only for my own sake, I should prefer to die. You must not confide in anyone, not even in your father. My father is not engaged in this fearful plot, is he, sir? Asked Valentine, clasping her hand. No, and yet your father, a man accustomed to judicial accusations, ought to have known that all these deaths have not happened naturally. It is he who should have watched over you. He should have occupied my place. He should have emptied that glass. He should have risen against the assassin. Spectre against spectre, he murmured in a low voice as he concluded his sentence. Sir, said Valentine, I will do all I can to live, for there are two beings whose existence depend upon mine, my grandfather and Maximilian. I will watch over them as I have over you. Well, sir, do as you will with me. And then she added in a low voice, Oh, heavens, what will befall me? Whatever may happen, Valentine, do not be alarmed. Though you suffer, though you lose sight, hearing, consciousness, fear nothing. Though you should awake and be ignorant where you are, still do not fear, even though you should find yourself in the sepulchral vault or coffin. Reassure yourself, then, and say to yourself, at this moment, a friend, a father, who lives for my happiness and that of Maximilian, watches over me. Alas, alas, what a fearful extremity! Valentine, would you rather denounce your stepmother? I would rather die 100 times. Oh, yes, Die! No, you will not die. But will you promise me, whatever happens, that you will not complain, but hope? I will think of Maximilian. You are my own darling child, Valentine. I alone can save you, and I will. Valentine, in the extremity of her terror, joined her hands, for she felt that the moment had arrived to ask for courage, and began to pray, and while uttering little more than incoherent words, she forgot that her white shoulders had no other covering than her long hair, and that the pulsations of her heart could be seen through the lace of her nightdress. Monte Cristo gently laid his hand on the young girl's arm, drew the velvet coverlet close to her throat, and said with a paternal smile, "My child, believe in my devotion to you, as you believe in the goodness of Providence and the love of Maximilian." Then he drew from his waistcoat pocket the little emerald box, raised the golden lid, and took from it a pastille about the size of a pea, which he placed in her hand. She took it, and looked attentively on the Count. There was an expression on the face of her intrepid protector which commanded her veneration. She evidently interrogated him by her look. "Yes," said he. Valentine carried the pastille to her mouth and swallowed it. "And now, my dear child, adieu for the present. I will try and gain a little sleep, for you are saved." "Go," said Valentine. "Whatever happens, I promise you not to fear." Monte Cristo, for some time, kept his eyes fixed on the young girl, who gradually fell asleep, yielding to the effects of the narcotic the Count had given her. Then he took the glass, emptied 3 parts of the contents in the fireplace, that it might be supposed Valentine had taken it, and replaced it on the table. Then he disappeared, after throwing a farewell glance on Valentine, who slept with the confidence and innocence of an angel. End of chapter 101. Recording by Mia.
2 of the Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Charlotte Duckett. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. The nightlight continued to burn on the chimney-piece, exhausting the last few drops of oil which floated on the surface of the water. The globe of the lamp appeared of a reddish hue, and the flame, brightening before it expired, threw out the last flickerings, which in an inanimate object have been so often compared to the convulsions of a human creature in his final agonies. A dull, dismal light was shed over the bedclothes and curtains surrounding the young girl. All noise of the streets had ceased, and the silence was frightful. It was then that the door of Edward's room opened, and a head, which we have before noticed, appeared in the glass opposite. It was Madame de Villefort, who came to witness the effects of the drink she had prepared. She stopped in the doorway, listened for a moment to the flickering of the lamp, the only sound in the deserted room, and then advanced to the table to see if Valentine's glass was empty. It was still about a quarter full, which we have before stated. Madame de Villefort emptied the contents into the ashes, which she disturbed that they might more readily absorb the liquid. Then she carefully rinsed the glass, and wiping it with her handkerchief, replaced it on the table. If anyone could have looked into the room just then, he would have noticed the hesitation with which Madame de Villefort approached the bed, and looked fixedly on Valentine. The dim light, the profound silence, and the gloomy thoughts inspired by the hour, and still more of her own conscience, all combined to produce the sensation of fear. The poisoner was terrified at the contemplation of her own work. At length she rallied, drew aside the curtain, and leaning over the pillow gazed intently on Valentine. The young girl no longer breathed, no breath issued through the half-closed teeth, the white lips no longer quivered, the eyes were suffused with a bluish vapour, and the long black lashes rested on her cheek white as wax. Madame de Villefort gazed upon her face so expressive even in its stillness. Then she ventured to raise the coverlet, and press her hand upon the young girl's heart. It was cold and motionless. She felt only the pulsation of her own fingers, and withdrew her hand with a shudder. One arm was hanging out of the bed. From the shoulder to elbow it was moulded after the arms of Germain Pilon's Graces, but the forearm seemed to be slightly distorted by convulsion, and the hand, so delicately formed, was resting with stiff outstretched fingers on the framework of the bed. The nails, too, were turning blue. Madame de Villefort had no longer any doubts. All was over. She had consummated the last terrible work she had to accomplish. There was no more to do in the room, so the poisoner retired stealthily, as though fearing to hear the sound of her own footsteps. But as she withdrew, she held aside the curtain, absorbed in the irresistible attraction always averted by the picture of death, so long as it was merely mysterious, and does not excite disgust. Just then the lamp again flickered. The noise startled Madame de Villefort, who shuddered and dropped the curtain. Immediately afterwards the light expired, and the room was plunged into frightful obscurity, while the clock at that minute struck 4:30. Overpowered by agitation, the poisoner succeeded in groping her way to the door, and reached her room in an agony of fear. The darkness lasted 2 hours longer. Then, by degrees a cold light crept through the Venetian blinds, until at length it was revealed the object in the room. About this time the nurse's cough was heard on the stairs, and the woman entered the room with a cup in her hand. To the tender eye of a father or a lover, the first glance would have sufficed to reveal Valentine's condition, but to this hireling Valentine only appeared to sleep. "Good!" she exclaimed, approaching the table. "She has taken part of her draught. The glass is 3/4 empty." Then she went to the fireplace and lit the fire, and, although she had just left her bed, she could not resist the temptation offered by Valentine's sleep, so she threw herself onto an armchair and snatched a little more rest. The clock striking 8 awoke her. Astonished at the prolonged slumber of the patient, and frightened to see that the arm was still hanging out of bed, she advanced towards Valentine, and for the first time noticed the white lips. She tried to replace the arm, but it moved with a frightful rigidity which could not deceive a sick nurse. She screamed aloud, then, running to the door, exclaimed, "Help! help!" "What is the matter?" asked M. d'Avrigny, at the foot of the stairs, it being the hour he usually visited her. "What is it?" asked Villefort, rushing from his home. "Doctor, do you hear them call for help?" "Yes, let us hasten up." It was in Valentine's room. But before the doctor and the father could reach the room, the servants, who were on the same floor, had entered, and seeing Valentine pale and motionless on the bed, had lifted their hands towards heaven, and stood transfixed, as though struck by lightning. "Call Madame de Villefort! Wake Madame de Villefort!" cried the procurer from the door of his chamber, which apparently he scarcely dared to leave. But instead of obeying him, the servant stood watching M. d'Avrigny, who ran to Valentine and raised her in his arms. "Is this one too?" he exclaimed. "Oh, where will be the end?" Villefort rushed into the room. "What are you saying, doctor?" he exclaimed, raising his hands to heaven. "I say that Valentine is dead," exclaimed d'Avrigny, in a voice terrible in its solemn calm. M. de Villefort staggered and buried his head on the bed. On the exclamation of the doctor and the cry of the father, the servants all fled with muttering imprecations. They were heard running down the stairs and through the long passages. Then there was a rush in the court. Afterwards all was still. They had, one and all, deserted the accursed house. Just then Madame de Villefort, in an act of slipping on her dressing gown, threw aside the drapery, and for a moment stood motionless, as though interrogating the occupants of the room, while she endeavored to call upon some rebellious tears. On a sudden she stepped, or rather bounded, with outstretched arms towards the table. She saw d'Avrigny curiously examine the glass, which she felt certain of having emptied during the night. It was now 1/3 full. just as it was when she threw its contents into the ashes. The spectre of Valentine rising before the poisoner would have alarmed her less. It was, indeed, the same colour as the draught she had poured into the glass, and which Valentine had drunk. It was indeed the poison which could not deceive Monsieur d'Avrigny, which he now examined so closely. It was doubtless a miracle from heaven that, notwithstanding her precautions, there should be some trace, some proof remaining to reveal the crime. While Madame de Villefort remained rooted to the spot like a statue of terror, and Villefort, with his head hidden in the bedclothes, saw nothing around him, d'Avrigny approached the window, that he might the better examine the contents of the glass, and dipped his finger in and tasted it. "Ah!" he exclaimed, "it is no longer brucine that is used. Let me see what it is." Then he ran to one of the cupboards in Valentine's room, which had been transformed into a medicine closet, and taking from its silver case a small bottle of nitric acid, dropped it in the liqueur, which immediately changed to a blood-red colour. "Ah!" exclaimed d'Avrigny, in a voice which the horror of a judge unveiled the truth was mingling with delight of a student making a discovery. Madame de Villefort was overpowered. Her eyes first flashed, then swam. She staggered towards the door and disappeared. Directly afterwards the distant sound of a heavy weight falling on the ground was heard, but no one paid much attention to it. The nurse was engaged in watching the chemical analysis, and Villefort was absorbed in grief. Monsieur d'Avrigny alone had followed Madame de Villefort with his eyes, and watched her hurried retreat. He lifted up the drapery over the entrance to Edward's room, and his eyes reached as far as Madame de Villefort's apartment. He beheld her extended lifeless on the floor. "Go to the assistance of Madame de Villefort," he said to the nurses. "Madame de Villefort is ill." "But Mademoiselle de Villefort," stammered the nurse. "Mademoiselle de Villefort no longer requires help," said d'Avrigny, "since she is dead." "Dead! Dead!" groaned forth Villefort, in a paroxysm of grief which was more terrible than the novelty of the sensation in the iron heart of that man. "Dead!" repeated a third voice. "Who said Valentine was dead?" The two men turned around, and saw Morrel standing at the door, pale and terror-stricken. This is what had happened. At the usual time Morrel had presented himself at the little door leading to Noirtier's room. Contrary to custom, the door was open, and having no occasion to ring, he entered. He waited for a moment in the hall, and called for a servant to conduct him to Monsieur Noirtier. But no one answered, the servants having, as we know, deserted the house. Morrel had no particular reason for uneasiness. Monte Cristo had promised him that Valentine should live, and, so far, he had always fulfilled his word. Every night the count had given him news, which the next morning confirmed by Noirtier. Still this extraordinary silence appeared strange to him, and he called a second and third time. Still no answer. Then he determined to go on. Noirtier's room was opened, like all the rest. The first thing he saw was the old man sitting in the armchair in his usual place, but his eyes expressed alarm, which was confirmed by the pallor in which overspread his features. "How are you, sir?" asked Morrel, with sickness of heart. "Well," answered the old man, by closing his eyes, but his appearance manifested increasing uneasiness. "You are thoughtful, sir," continued Morrel. "You want something. Shall I call one of the servants?" "Yes," replied Noirtier. Morrel pulled the bell, and though he nearly broke the cord, no one answered. He turned towards Noirtier. The pallor and anguish expressed in his countenance momentarily increased. "Oh," exclaimed Morrel, "why do they not come? Is anyone ill in the house?" The eyes of Noirtier seemed as though they would start from their sockets. "What's the matter? You alarm me. Valentine? Valentine?" "Yes, yes." sighed Noirtier. Maximilian tried to speak, but he could articulate nothing. He staggered and supported himself against the wainscot. Then he pointed at the door. "Yes, yes, yes," continued the old man. Maximilian rushed up the little staircase, while Noirtier's eyes seemed to say, "Quicker, quicker." In a minute the young man darted through several rooms, till at length he reached Valentine's. There was no occasion to push the door, it was wide open. A sob was the only thing he heard. He saw, as though in a mist, a black figure kneeling and buried in a confused mass of white drapery. A terrible fear transfixed him. It was then he heard a voice exclaim, "Valentine is dead," and another voice, which, like an echo, repeated, "Dead, dead." End of chapter 102.